Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. This video is called Sigil Mania. We're going to be looking at sigils in medieval Renaissance astrological magic and our new Sufi Algol Talismans. So I thought sigils were a good topic. It's interesting. Our Sufi Algol Talismans, we're going to show them later, really prominently feature the Algol Sigil, one of the sigils of Algol. And it got me thinking about, what is a sigil? And then how has it used in medieval Renaissance? Because I know they're popular in modern magic, chaos magic, things like that. And so I think it's useful to kind of give a differentiation and show how the different uses in the different schools. So a sigil, I looked it up. I looked up the etymology, the root of it. And so it says a sign, mark, or seal. And the first use of it shows up mid-15th century. A sigille, from the Latin sigillum, which is from sign, basically. And in Latin, it refers to statuettes, little images, or seals. And the ultimate root of it is the Latin signum, which means identifying mark or sign. I think this is really helpful, this etymology. It really kind of breaks down a lot of the sort of different factors and powers and concepts that are floating around with sigil. I mean, first of all, I think identifying mark. I think this is probably one of the most salient uses of the sigil. And then it starts to become used magically. So as you can see, like I said, so originally started off as a sign or an identifying mark. It's used on statuettes or images or seals, again, and then it becomes a synonym for the talisman itself. So when we're thinking about this, we immediately run into this concept, this word symbol. Okay, and that is loaded up with a whole lot of meaning coming from our basic modern atheistic materialistic background. Okay, and again, I end up being a bit of a bore on the subject, but it is important because if we don't understand our basic worldview, understand our the reality that we're in, we think there's only one reality, and that's this modern atheistic material reality or whatever worldview we're in, then we can't understand how it's shaping all our views of everything. So atheistic materialism, nothing exists except matter and energy, fits with the deconstructivism. You can break everything down. Anything can be broken down basically to, again, either random interactions of subatomic particles or physical laws. And then nihilism. It's like everything's meaningless, everything is made up. That's another deconstructivist idea too. At some point, some human being consciously created anything in our culture, and could be anything else. They could have said, ups, down, rights, left. It doesn't make any difference. It's all made up. There's no meaning to anything. It's all just, this, like I said, meaningless, made up stuff. So I kind of wonder about that. I mean, think about this, the stop on red, right? Because stop sign's red, red lights are, and the traffic lights are red. I mean, it's like, it'd be a really good example of something that was, just a cultural construct, in other words. It's something that has no inherent meaning, obviously. Someone just made it up. Here's the problem with that. If you watch the movie The Last Emperor, this traces the life of the last emperor of China. And the beginning of the film sort of starts at the end in the Cultural Revolution, probably around 1965, 1968. And so you're in Beijing, and everybody's waiting on bicycles at this traffic light, and then it changes to red and they go, which is weird, obviously, because we're red equals stop. But during the Cultural Revolution, they had such an incredible emphasis on red being good, redder than the red rising sun, Chairman Mao. And they're very simplistic about stuff. So obviously red could not be stop. Red had to be go. Red is good. Red has to be go. So they changed all the traffic lights, and everything. Now, I wondered about that, and I looked up, modern China, and as far as I can tell, in China today in 2025, red is stop. Okay? And so green is go and red is stop. And that's pretty much universal throughout the world. So it's like, even if you've got this incredible desire to change this stuff, they couldn't do it. So I kind of start wondering how much of it, this deconstructivist idea of it's just made up, we could always change it if we wanted to. It's like, I don't look like we can change it. So as far as the sourcing, you can argue about whether humans came up with it or not. But I don't think this is something that you can't really look at a lot of these symbols and everything like that as being symbolic in the way that people think they are. That there's something, like I said, that was made up by somebody's ego self that could be just changed at any moment. So when we get back into the medieval Renaissance period, we're not deconstructivists, they're not nihilists, they're not atheistic materialists. They're looking at reality as having this spiritual basis to it, that the spiritual is not only controls everything, connects everything, but is primary. And the material is actually this sort of beaten down, imperfect reflection of the spiritual, underlying perfection. So in particular, if we start thinking about, like marks or identifying things like a name, for example, name is spiritually connected to the thing. If you invoke a spirit, you do it by name. If you do a curse or benefic, thing, you're going to connect it to the person you want to affect or the thing you want to affect by using their name or by an identifying mark or something like that. So not symbolic, an actual spiritual connection here. So sigils are really, I think, very much the same thing. They're connected. They encapsulate the thing. There's a sort of fractal quality of it. Then the piece contains the whole. So it's sort of like a graphic name. You could think of it that way, a good example, if we want to dive right into a medieval Renaissance source, is Hermes on the 15 fixed stars. So if you take a look at Hermes and the 15 fixed stars, and this is the Renaissance Astrology translation, De Quindecim Stellis, that just means in Latin 15 stars. You can see a link to that on the webpage there. You can get a copy of this. I mean, really, this is a comprehensive text. All the translations, manuscript translations that were floating around of Hermes and the 15 fixed stars, plus some additional variations of it. For example, Ficino, Agrippa, all contained in here. And so if you look at each of the 15 fixed stars, they're listings, and they have a star, and then they have their magical effect, and then they have their rulership of herbs and stones, and then they have an image, and then they have a sigil. Okay, and so if we think about these things, all of these things are connected. All of these things are referring to or connected to the fixed star in a sense. But actually, what the way they would have thought about it probably is in terms of occult virtue. And so occult virtue, again, sort of needs to be translated into modern thinking, because occult doesn't mean bad or evil or something. It just means hidden. And virtue doesn't mean ethical, doing the right thing. It means power. So these are hidden powers, okay? As opposed to air, earth, fire, and water, which are the obvious, four elements. Those are the elemental powers. These are occult. These are hidden. And their origin comes from, ultimately from the one, okay? Everything exists in a perfect and undifferentiated state in unity in the one, then in a perfect and differentiated state as thoughts of the one, divine thoughts, Platonic ideas or intelligence that are archetypes and angels, however you want to personify or think about them. Then as seminal ideas in the anima mundi, the soul of the world. This is like a seed idea. If you think of the seed like a, whatever it is, weed or pine tree or flower or something, has everything it needs to become in that flower or that pine tree or whatever. It's all encapsulated there. Again, this is the idea of seminal ideas. Then in the celestials, in perfected occult virtue is in the celestials and constellations, fixed stars and planets. Then in mathematical ratios, number, images and forms, sigils, so speech, writing, and then finally in the least perfect form of material objects. So the tendency is to really, focus on fixed stars. It's like, oh, Algol, diamond, you have to make it out of diamond. It's like, well, diamond actually doesn't contain or encapsulate the occult virtue of Algol as perfectly as the sigil of Algol. The sigil of Algol actually is closer to the occult virtue, closer to perfection, because it's not material object. When we see the physical sigil, that is a physical representation of this underlying deeper ratio and form that exists more perfectly. And if you think about it, if you think of a triangle in your mind, if you conceive of it and you try to write it, you're always going to have imperfection. It's always not going to be quite as long. It's going to have some, when you write it, it's going to be kind of squiggly. No matter what you do, if you do with, with a computer and print it out, you blow it up, it's going to have pixels. Anything in material form is less perfect. So this obsession with material objects, material form, material magic, again, comes from atheistic materialism, because to atheistic materialism, nothing exists except matter and energy. And under the pull of that, unconsciously, people really focus in on the material object, when in fact, like I said, the image or the sigil are more powerful, and it could, because they're more directly relating that occult virtue. The other thing is just pure practicality. You can engrave a diamond. It would be hideously expensive, and you're not going to be able to put an image, this complicated image on a diamond. Now, perhaps you could get a sigil on it, but then who could ever afford to have an Algol talisman? It's not possible. And why are you going to do that when you're actually getting a more powerful instantiation or manifestation of that occult virtue when you have an image or you have a sigil? And if you think about that, it makes sense. This idea of a picture being worth 1,000 words. It's complete. It encapsulates it. And this is why our focus in our practice really always has been on talismans with images and talismans with sigils. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the types and sources of sigils and medieval Renaissance astrological magic. So the classic, I think, thing that many people have heard of and are familiar with is Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, when they use magical squares to generate sigils. Okay, so let me just give you an example here. These are the magical squares of the planets, and these are done in numerical form. And so what's interesting about a magical square is if you go horizontally, vertically, or diagonally in any of these magical squares, they'll all add up to the same number. So there's this really amazing inherent, trippy, underlying form, that's shown here. And this is showing this, the thing about this interesting about math is that scientists, the atheist materialism seems to think that math has something to do with science. It doesn't really. Math is so Platonic, so much a sense of discovering these underlying inherent relationships. I mean, 1 + 1 is 2. It's not because someone made it up. It's because this is an inherent reality. And that's where these mathematical forms are. So very intense, very trippy. And so what's interesting about it is if you think about in both Arabic and Hebrew, the traditional way of representing numbers were as letters. And so let me just give an example. This is a talisman page, and you can see, just get that up here, and you can see this is you can see the Jupiter magic square, okay, and it's both in Hebrew. Oops, let me get it out of the way there. It's both in Hebrew and then the numerical equivalent of the Hebrew. Okay, so if you want to generate a name, what you do is you would trace the name. Okay, and you can see at the top there, those are examples of sigils that were used, that were created, and you have particular letters, and you move from one letter to the other, and then the path that you take, as you can see, the beginning and end is a circle, and then you can see the paths up there that you trace through to create the magic squares. So very popular. People like to do those a lot. It's sort of modern people, they like algorithmic stuff. It's almost like software. You just like plug it in and it gives you the answer. You don't have to do anything with it. And so, it's certainly very traditional, very powerful. We do use them on our talismans. There's not, I'm not anti-Agrippa or anything like that. But my personal preference is less, sort of mathematical. And so let's talk about some other types of sigils. I mean, if you look at any kind of grimoire or astrological magic manuscript or something like that from the Middle Ages and Renaissance, they're going to have tons of sigils in them. So huge number of variations. So now let me just give an example of some of these. If you take a look at, again, De Quindecim Stellis, you can see there's these are different variant manuscripts and showing different sigils. Very cool. Lots of different sigils and different ways of doing these. Again, every manuscript is going to have different sigils. Very, very cool. And again, another reason why to have this book is it's got, we've got 5 or 6 different manuscripts in there, 5 or 6 different variations of them. So very cool, interesting sigils. Probably the root of some of these were the classic, Greek and Roman magic, what they call characteres. And so, I mean, here's an example of that from a classical. This would be a difficzione, which would be a lead sheet, very thin lead, and they would draw on it with a stylus. And they would typically roll it up then, and then you could bury it in the place where you wanted it to take the effect. And you could do curses with it or benefic stuff, and you can see these characteres. And there's a tendency for them to have a sort of circles at the end and then lines connecting the circles. In medieval Renaissance sources, I've seen this say, well, these are like stars and then the rays connecting the stars. And so then at the bottom of the sheet, you can see this is a set of symbols of the planets. And these, I believe, are in the correct order from Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. And you can see the kind of a combination of characteries with you can see the circles and lines connecting them, and then sort of the traditional symbols, signs of the planets. And of course, the moon is in like the moon. Mercury looks like Mercury, more or less. Venus sort of looks like Venus. It's got a triangle instead of a circle, that sort of stuff. So, these, even though these are from the classic period, obviously they connected into Picatrix. You can see it's like it was written 1000 AD, drawing on these earlier sources. So the characteries are also sources for sigils. One of the things then that people will get into is they'll be like, well, which the right one? Okay, and because this is sort of the obsession. Now, this is an example of, these are Algol sigils. At the top is the Agrippa Algol sigil. The Agrippa sigils are the ones that we tend to use. They're very sort of proportionate and orderly looking, but why do we use them? Not because they're the best, but because those are our personal preference. But you can see these are, again, from Quintessence Stellis. We've got 6 different manuscripts here, and then 6 different variations of the Algol sigil. And you can see that they have some similarities, but they're also quite different. So my approach to this is not to come in here and jump and say, okay, this is the best one. I tried it once. I made $1 million. It's the best. I tried it once. Everything blew up. It was disastrous, which means it's true for everybody. This kind of subjective anecdotal stuff does not get you anywhere in terms of figuring out, even for yourself necessarily. I mean, obviously you're going to decide for yourself based on your individual experience, but to say because I had this individual experience and one other person had a problem that it's bad for everybody, I mean, this is the typical approach. It just really doesn't make any sense. I mean, for me, what I would do is to say, look, these are from traditional sources, and therefore I think any of them is useful, and you can pick the one that you intuitively are drawn to, or use one or more or none, whatever. It's really your choice. I mean, when you're making a talisman, what you're trying to do is to concentrate that occult virtue. It's one way of looking at it, or to create a space that's congenial to the spirit to inhabit. Obviously, Algol, for example, is going to like a talisman that has his or her sigil on it. So again, I think really opens up the doors to really a lot of your personal choice, your personal intuition in which sigils you use, and you've got a great toolkit here in your traditional sources. So I think that's the sigil stuff. I think ultimately my preference, less for the mechanical ones from the Agrippa Magical Squares, but my view that these sigils likely were originally inspired by the spirits themselves, by the celestial angels. Through dreams or visions, this information was given to the mage or the sage, along with the information as far as the rulership and things like that, the images that are appropriate to be used. And this idea that, everything happened like, 500 years ago and we're frozen and we're stuck with it. And again, and that's the kind of extreme. Either you're making everything up as you go along, or you're just kind of frozen in 1650 and you can't change anything. Really, my approach is to want to immerse myself in the traditional sources to the point that I can understand the essence. I'm initiated in these traditions. I've done enough practice with it that I have a sense of how to operate in it as a master. And I think that's really, I mean, obviously I'm doing it that way, so I think it's the best. But I think that's the way to that's the middle path between, just like I said, making stuff up on the spot and with unconscious atheistic materialism, or just being frozen by the sources. And if it's not in the source, you can't do it. And if the source says do it one way, you have to do it that way. And you can't even think about what's going on. So the example I want to show today is our Sufi Magic Algol Talisman. And you can see these are really cool talismans because typically our talismans are about 1.5 inches, the pendants, and this is a 1-inch talisman, so this is a smaller talisman. These are really ideal for if you want to wear something that's easy to wear, easy to store if you want to carry it with you for some reason. I mean, you don't have to wear the talismans. I mean, people always asking me, do I have to wear next to skin, blah, blah, blah. No. I mean, the key with the talisman, from my standpoint, is the consecration, is that you make contact with the angel of spirit once you get the talisman. They're already consecrated when they're made, but you make contact with the consecration, and then you sort of start the relationship that keeps it going strong. I'm a little bit of a OCD or maybe a fanatic with Algol. I'm doing Algol every single day. Now that would be a pain because you'd have to calculate when Algol was rising or culminating as the time for the consecration. Unless you're an astrologer, this is probably a little bit much. I do have available on the website, I'll put the link there, Algol Blitz, which is, I mean, when you get a talisman, you get one free consecration. And this Algol Blitz is 10. You can get that. That's a good way to kind of get a punch up the Algol. This, as you can see, has the Algol Sigil on it. And that's really the key to this is the power. It also says Algol in English and Arabic as well because it's a Sufi talisman. So these are really great talismans. I'm really happy to add them into our Algol collection. I'm really very focused on Algol. I think personally for me, Algol has been a very positive influence, very strong, our most powerful protective talisman. People come and say, which talisman should I get for protection from enemies, from spiritual attack, things like that. I'm always going to start with Algol. Now, lots of people are worried about Algol. They go on the internet and read this stuff and they get all freaked out. Hasn't been my experience, but I wouldn't want to say it's invalid for everybody. So again, we have lots of different protective talismans. So if you didn't want to do Algol, you could do Antares, you could do Vega, you could do Procyon, you could do Alkide. Lots and lots of fixed stars. They really are, in our traditional sources, the key type of a celestial factor or object or being or whatever that you can go to for spiritual protection. So check these out. We don't have a lot of these. If you're checking this video out too long after January 2025, they may well be sold out. But again, because the primary image on this is the Algol Sigil, like I said, it really inspired me to say, well, let's do a deep dive into what sigils are and how they're used in medieval Renaissance astrology. Now, I will say that, for example, Jason Miller has collaborated with at least one artist and done new planetary sigils. And I thought, the ones that I've seen that Jason has used are really beautiful, really gorgeous. And I think the essence here is the question of where is the source of the sigil? Where is the source of the image? If you're coming from the standpoint that it's all about me and then my ego self created this, it's like a chaos magic approach that, in fact, I'm the one who's creating all these things, and I can have Mickey Mouse as a god or whatever if I want to. If I want to make it up as that, it's all up to me. That's a modern approach, and that doesn't really so much appeal to me. I mean, I'm not saying it's invalid. It's not my sense of it is, though, in my interaction, that these are real beings that exist separate from me, and in fact are way more powerful than I am. I mean, the intelligence, the archangel, the spirit, the angel of any, Jupiter or planet or fixed star is so much more powerful than I am, and I just feel like there's such a strong, benign presence when I do the invocation. And so, really my focus is to say I like the traditional stuff because it sort of has that stamp of approval, the imprimatur of the tradition. It's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years by many different magicians and for astrological magic. That carries some weight with me in terms of it. But also, I think the ultimate seal of approval, so to speak, is your own personal experience. And if we're going to advance astrological magic, I mean, there's 15 fixed stars, in our source that we have full information for that we make talismans for because we have that information. There's 1,000 fixed stars. I think any of them is possible to make talismans for and to interact with, but we will need to have people having contact with those spirits, with those angels, through dreams and visions, and getting the information that we need to actually make the talismans. And so to me, that's the way forward, not some mechanical thing, not some made up algorithmic method, but actual contact spiritually with these very powerful beings. And so, the more I do the Algol, like I said, I'm doing daily invocations. I feel a very strong bond. I feel like that protection is manifesting itself in my life, for my family, for my house, for my work. And so, it's really a really positive experience for me. So check out those Algol Sufi Talismans. I think you'll find them a really cool addition to our set of Algol Talismans and all our protective talismans. And then also check out De Quindusem Stellis. And so you've got a kind of a better idea of what sigils are, how they work, and how they're part of this unified whole. Ultimately, my sense of it is not that there's a spiritual connection of all things, but there are no separate things, that everything is one. And that in our contact with something, with the name of something, the sigil of something or whatever, that we're coming in contact with the thing itself, and that we're really never out of contact with it. So very trippy, very cool to experience, and one of the reasons that I really love astrological magic as a practical effort because it brings me in touch with all these spiritual realities. So I hope you enjoy that. Like I said, check out the Sufi Algol Talismans, Quindecim Stellis, and I hope you'll enjoy the new videos that we have in Renaissance Astrology as much as I enjoy making them.